And it was very great that you mentioned Howard Garrett, because Howard has been fighting for Lolita for decades, and I think it was Superpod 2, I was sitting chatting with Howard, and I said to him, dear God, I don't want to ever be you for Morgan, 40 years down the track for Morgan, and yet here we are 8 years down the track, and anyway, okay, Jeff. Go.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Ingrid's going to do most of the talking here. We started to collaborate together. Well, we've been collaborating since about 2011 when you and Lori and people chimed in on our keto telecom paper. When John Jett and I, first got involved with, after Don was killed and began speaking out, we had already been, including with Carol back into the late 80s, we had already been talking about the dental issues that these orcas suffer in captivity, and we reported on the jaw popping phenomena, this behavioral stereotypies that Ingrid talks about all the time. And so we put that first paper together called Keto and Tillicum, Express the Stress of Orca Captivity, and Ingrid, we consulted with her on it and other people, and we wanted to originally put that first paper under peer review, but we were trying to get it published prior to the OSHA versus SeaWorld trial that was scheduled for February of 2011 initially, and it got pushed back so that we probably could have got it peer reviewed before we put it together. But anyway, it worked out well. It was published at the Orca Project. If you haven't read it yet, it's got like 250,000 views, so it's actually been our most popular paper. But we wanted to break that paper down and into chunks and then get it peer reviewed. And we've been doing that. John and I have put out 3 papers and a chapter in a university book so far. Those 4 pieces are peer reviewed. And so at Superpod 4.
That's coming.
All right.
Spoiler alert.
So we're just going to kind of go back and forth on these slides a little bit. I like Ingrid's voice better, so maybe she can do most of the talking. But thanks everybody for coming, and I know it's a long day, and thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah, apologies that you guys have to sit through the 10-minute break for a talk. Okay, so as scientists, one of the things in our career is to get something peer-reviewed. And for those of you that don't know the process, it's long and involved. We don't get paid. We actually have to pay the journal to publish our work. It can be anything up to 3 or 4 years before something that you start on actually gets published. In this case, this was actually a relatively quick turnaround. So we're going to explain to you how it sort of came about. If we can get this to work. Wow. Oh, there we go. Okay, this one's yours.
Yeah, this is a picture that Ingrid took of Porky, and what we noticed when we were actually working at SeaWorld is that there was 2 basic mechanisms of teeth wear. One of them was the stereotypy of grinding their jaw on the side of the angle of the corner of the pool. It's concrete. There's been papers written that animals do this to maybe help with stress and upset stomachs and stuff like that. But anyway, Corky clearly shows the grinding method of wearing her teeth out, and you can see that there.
And then the other option, or the other cause of it, is the fracturing of the teeth. So this can happen from the grinding as well, but it can also be from jaw popping, which is what Jeff was talking about, where they smack their jaws together really hard, and it can also be when they hit their jaws on things like steel bars.
So this is just, I put a couple slides that I had made actually for Twitter, and I wanted to kind of get the word out there, because SeaWorld has talked, like they always do, a lot of propaganda about teeth in captivity. Ike shows the difference between both mechanisms. If you look at the back teeth right there, those have been busted off. What the animals will do, what the behavior of jaw popping is, it's kind of like the 2 whales will charge each other, especially if they're separated by a steel gate. And I've actually told SeaWorld, I recommended that they change the bars from horizontal to vertical, because that would not allow jaw popping to occur. But they don't listen to disgruntled ex-employees, so they haven't made any changes. But what happens is they'll charge each other and pop their jaws. Dolphins there's been papers written about dolphin jaw popping in the wild, but the steel bar gets in the way and they fracture those back teeth, and that's what you can see in the very back of Ike's mandible there. And then also the front teeth right there get chipped in a similar method. And what SeaWorld has been doing is doing these pulpotomy procedures, which is where we would take basically a Dremel tool with a drill bit on it and drill that tooth out all the way down into the jawline. And so you would see the trainers flushing the fish debris out of the teeth, the cores of the teeth, 3 times a day. And so that's one of the most tragic things about captivity, is that the whales then become a medical issue, and that's why we talk sanctuary now instead of full release. Lolita is an exception. She's got excellent teeth, so she could actually be potentially fully released. And of course, that's what everyone's hoping for.
Yeah, so SeaWorld was a bit freaked out when they saw this photograph, not only because Jeff had broken it down, but they were like, how did Ingrid get that photograph? They thought I'd sneaked into the park. Okay, so obviously the Voice of the Orcas team has an incredible history with having worked in the industry, and this is what makes whistleblowers so incredibly valuable in all these sorts of things that we've been talking about. And we've just listed a few of the examples and some of the animals. And with that, that SeaWorld can't dispute that, because these were their employees. It's not like someone like myself who's never been involved in any of these issues, actually doing it myself, writing a paper by myself. So this is what made part of the paper so powerful. And Jeff was telling me that many times while they're doing these things, and here we have a trainer flushing out the teeth, there would be one of them on the mic.
Yeah, it was really a masterful play, because for years and years you can't do this behind a curtain. I guess you could these days, but these 3 times a day on every whale, you've got 9 or 10 whales. That's a lot of teeth flushings that are going on. So SeaWorld took that and spun it, and while you're doing the procedure, they're telling, hey, these whales get superior dental care than those in the wild. But they forget to mention the part where they break their teeth because of captivity. So that's one of the things we proved in the paper here.
And,
Yeah, well, so, I don't know, a lot of you know my backstory. The CNN, I think, either called Howard or the center, and Howard did the first handoff when Dawn was killed. So I ended up being on Anderson Cooper, like the day she died. And they were asking me questions, and that Anderson Cooper interview that I got led to a Wolf Blitzer, which led to CBS Morning Show, which led to Tim Zimmerman writing a paper, which led to Gabriella making Blackfish. So that's kind of how it went down. And yeah. And, Margot just mentioned collaboration. So we had a really tight group. It included and Howard and Tim and myself and Ingrid, and we all started, snowballing a little bit. But this shows you on 3 days after Dawn was killed, I'm reporting back to Howard that, we're going to go with this teeth issue, because we thought early on that it would be easiest to exploit, because SeaWorld can talk about things like survival and try to muddy the waters, but with the teeth you have the direct visual evidence. So this is just an example of Howard and I communicating about that. Same thing. So within the first week that Dawn was killed, JJ, I actually used the connection that I got from the producers at CNN and said, hey, I've got another guy that wants to write an op-ed piece at CNN, and he did. And JJ started hammering the teeth issue as well. So what we had over SeaWorld, we had no money, we were both working, but we did have speed. Every time SeaWorld makes a decision, they have to have a board meeting, and we were just able to kind of outmaneuver them. And so this is, me kind of handing off to JJ, basically. But that slide did show, I'm sending her pictures, right? I just went on the internet and wrote broken teeth or something like that, or orca open mouth, I told her right there, so yeah. Yeah, so once again, I'm talking to different people here. PETA reached out to me, I guess is why I put this one here, on March 24th, 1 month after Dawn was killed. PETA wanted to get involved, and PETA did some excellent work, especially Jeff Kerr and Jared Goodman on the legal end. But they reached out to me, and that's an example of a part of a thread. So I'm spreading the word about the teeth, basically.
So what we're showing you here is that although the paper came out in in 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, it goes so fast. You know, the start of it was already happening only days after Dawn had been killed, and then the momentum's building.
So that led to the paper that I mentioned that's been well read. It's still up at the Orca Project. I asked Colleen Gorman how many hits it had like over a year ago. It was like 165,000, plus it's posted at my Scribd site. So we know that it's been read over 250,000 times. This is one of the pieces that was in that paper, and I just wanted to talk about the paper and point you to the paper because it was a little more lay person friendly. I think it's a good start for anyone that hasn't read it yet. So I put the title on there. Please check that out.
And then one of our colleagues who is on the paper with us, the final peer-reviewed paper, she actually is based in New Zealand. She's a Brazilian, and she was working at a university, and through an orca event in New Zealand where tragically we had 9 orca die, I had invited her to come and help. And we recovered all the teeth from that. And while we were doing all the necropsies and the stuff, she was talking to me about all of her papers. And I said to her, wow, you know, Carolina, you really have to be in on this game that we're doing at the moment. And you know, she's just pure science. She's not an activist. She's never been to a marine park. She wasn't aware of all of this stuff. And she was just fascinated in the fact that we had evidence and that we had an insight with these whistleblowers. So I went to Jeff and John and I said, what do you reckon, guys? Would you like a scientist who's actually published on dolphins' teeth? And these were the first papers that was specifically looking at assessing teeth, not just talking about them, but actually quantifying what the problems were. And you guys were very open to it. And again, it's this collaboration thing, you know, straight in there, and it really helped us because she had a very good insight to the literature. And she also had scoring methods, and so we could rely on her to help upskill us as well.
I took this picture. This is actually when the deal went down. We were watching on Jeff Friedman's boat, and they were actually talking teeth right there. And I remembered that moment, so I thought I'd actually put the boat right where it went down.
Yeah, it was something that sticks in my mind very, very well. There were a couple of topics that we discussed, and I said, you know, look, we should be writing a peer-reviewed paper about this because SeaWorld cannot challenge that. They can't challenge the data anyway, but they can't challenge if it's peer-reviewed. And I remember shaking these guys' hands and saying, let's do it. So from 2015 onwards, it was an uphill struggle, but we got there. So in the meantime, I was also working on a report from Loro Parque, or using the Loro Parque animals, with another one of the board members of the Free Morgan Foundation, Rosina Lisker, who's been at Superpod. Some of you might remember her from last time. And what we were doing was we were taking these individual teeth and then we were describing the teeth and then having categories and then putting each and every tooth into a category that we had predetermined with a photographic example, so that it wasn't rocket science. It was pretty easy that you could just say, you could take a tooth from any animal in captivity or any orca and say, okay, that tooth belongs into this category. So you could go and score your own animals as well. And we hadn't seen anything done like this before, and it took us nearly a year to prepare this report.
That's just the actual abstract that's available at PubMed or whatever search engine you use to find literature, and that's the title of the paper with the Archives of Oral Biology. So it was a respected oral biology journal, so it was appropriate. John and I had published a survival paper before, and survival, it was just, we wanted to get, and we tried to publish other stuff in the zoological literature, but they're kind of a lot of times in bed with the industry, and so we wanted to go into the oral literature to publish this one. And
Carolina, our co-author, had published in this journal before, and also, again, for those of you that don't know how it works with peer review, you don't necessarily know who your peer is that's going to review this. So with us stating that we were looking at facilities in the United States, it was pretty obvious that it was in SeaWorld. And so it's very likely that had we gone to a marine mammal journal, that they would have sent it to SeaWorld to review it, or certainly to somebody who was privy to what was going on, and it might have leaked. And given what happened at Superpod with the mole and the leaking of that story, we were very, very hesitant, and we were doing quite a few secret squirrel Skype calls and not putting things in emails in case they were intercepting stuff. And so the idea with doing this peer review in the dentistry journal, basically, the chances were that it wouldn't really leak. And the reviewers were phenomenal. They turned this around. You can wait sometimes a year for reviewers to read your paper and get back to you. And these guys turned it around pretty quickly. It was impressive. And so we wanted to just also put the paper in a little bit of a framework for you as well. So this isn't our results yet, but it's because we didn't look at free-ranging orca, we didn't look at wild orca. We purposely chose not to, because then you start to have a lot of other issues, and we just wanted to have a very tight paper. So when you look at wild orca, and it doesn't matter where you go in the world, generally it's uncommon to see any tooth damage. But you do see dental wear. Right? So this is different than damage. This is just an everyday kind of thing that accumulates over time. And you can see at the top here, there's a little black line. That's where that tooth would have been had it not been worn down. And you can see on this tooth, it's just starting to do it, and here. Now these are all to scale. They're the same scale. And it gives you an idea of the different morphology of the teeth based on the different ecotypes as well. So those animals are all adult males.
One thing I would like to add, and we did base our scoring of teeth on a method that John Ford used on the wild orca in this area. So
Yep.
Thank you, John Ford.
Yeah, John Ford did a lot of work on this too, yeah. Oh, yes, so broken or missing teeth are even rarer than just damage. Okay, so this is an important fact to keep in mind for what comes next.
So yeah, this is, I think, Tillicum, or no, it's not Tillicum. It's Katina. Yeah, when I was working with Katina in the mid '90s, she was the matriarch and had a pristine mouth. And this shows you what happened from, I think this was a 2013 picture. So from '96, all of her teeth were intact, and this is what she looks like today. And it was really interesting because we kind of theorized a little bit why her mouth was so pristine. And my thought was that because she was the matriarch, she wasn't getting raked or displaced as much as the other whales. But for a time, Taima actually took over, and those two kind of battled it out. Taima died in 2010 with like a bunch of other whales that year, but I think her teeth damage actually started when Taima challenged her and became either co-matriarch or matriarch herself. So that's really interesting to me.
So one of the spins that SeaWorld puts on their damaged teeth in the orca and the captivity situation is that in the wild, orca get damaged teeth like the offshore tooth that you saw there because of prey handling, and they claim, of course, that that's the main reason that their orca have it. And the most recent thing that we've seen them say is that orca don't have hands, so they manipulate objects in their environment. And those facts are true, but the claim that the teeth are being damaged because of prey handling, and yet you see them throwing food into the back of the mouth of the animals, and they very rarely touch the teeth. That cannot be enough of a contribution to cause the damage that we're seeing. And it's a different type of damage as well. So conspecific aggression, and this is what Jeff was talking about, where animals can see each other, particularly through bars, but in this case this is Loro Parque, and if you note here they've put these bars over the top. This is used to be a sliding area for the animals to have fun, but then they found that they were attacking each other, so then they put these low bars, and there's a chain here. You can't see it, but it actually goes underneath the whale and up across to the other side here. And there's another chain, you can just see it in there. So they put these low bars in, they went over the top of the low bars because their aggression was so strong. Then they put in a taller bar, they went over the top of that, then they put in they welded these nuts on the top. Only one of the orca, Tukoa, went over the top, and he still bears the scars. Yeah, can you imagine any one of us doing that? It'd hurt like hell. But you imagine if you're an orca, and when you're halfway over, you've only got one choice, you've got to keep going. So this aggression is highly motivated. This is not just a, I don't like you kind of thing. This is serious, full-on attacks.
We've already talked about this. This is one of the ways they destroy their teeth. They chew on concrete. It's a neurotic behavior. It's stereotypy. And you can see the whale doing it right there.
Yeah, and it's very, very common. You can see it 10 or 15 times in 10 or 15 minutes in some of the facilities and some of the animals. But every single orca does this.
So this is what we did. At the time when we did the study, Laurel Park, SeaWorld had not ditched their family of whales to Laurel Park. Sarcasm there. But yeah, so we looked at 29 whales. I think all of you know, since Morgan got pregnant, SeaWorld suddenly didn't own those whales anymore. But anyway, this is what we did. We looked at 29 whales. We used John Ford's method for grading the coronal wear or fractures, and we'll go into that in a second.
Yeah, so we took photographs, probably 80% of the photographs are my own from each of the facilities that I'd been to, and they were taken from the public area. Now, had we had access to the animals up close and personal and been able to get better photographs, I don't think that the data would have been any different, perhaps only for the small hairline fractures on the teeth, because you'll see some of them, they're quite hard to see. In many instances, I'm taking photographs as if you can imagine that you're sitting up in the balcony there, or even out on outside the building to the distance of where the animal is now. Using a long lens, but still, it was quite hard at times to get pictures. We looked at the 4 facilities, so California, Texas, Florida, and of course California, the Canary Islands, because that was the SeaWorld stable. And we wanted to use all of those animals for a number of reasons. The more you have, statistically, the better your results. But we also wanted to make sure that people didn't forget that these were SeaWorld's animals sitting in the Canary Islands, because so often that gets forgotten. So each tooth was scored, and we first of all assessed, was the tooth present or was it absent? And so we've given you an example of what that might look like. Then we looked at coronal wear, and that changed for each tooth. Some of them had very little, some of them had a fair bit of it. And then we looked at worn down to the gums. So of course, if you had a tooth that was worn down to the gum, then the coronal wear was all the way down, right? But it was also worn to the gum. We wanted to do that because in some cases teeth were very, very flat, but still raised above the gum. Then we looked at the drilling, the bore holes, and some of them were substantial and some of them were quite small. And Jeff and John had told me that they increase the size of the Dremel head as the decay sets in. And then we looked at fractures, and it's a little bit hard to see in here, but I have put yellow arrows on there, and in good light you can see that there's a line runs down there and there's a line runs down there. So that particular tooth, L2, so lower 2, that one has 2 fractures, although we only scored a tooth if it was fractured or not fractured, not how many fractures it had. And then this is actually Morgan's tooth. It's completely split in half. And that was taken about 300 metres away from her. And when I went to the veterinarians that day and I said to them, when did she fracture her tooth? They said she doesn't have any fractured teeth. And they still claim that she doesn't, but we have the photographic evidence for it. Compared.
Yeah.
Well, I can carry on. All right. So then, once we'd scored every single tooth, we then went and compared the captive born to the wild captured animals. And the idea being that Could we say that there was something that was really, really obvious? You know, was it if you came into captivity, you damaged your teeth more? Or as they claim, well, look, they're born in captivity. That's all they know. Everything's good, right? So can we see that there is some sort of a difference there? And then we looked at males and females. Was the aggression more prevalent in the males? Or as a matriarchal society, was it driven more by the females? We looked at various ages. Did it get worse over time? Or was it that if you were born in captivity, then you never had a problem, so it didn't matter how old you were? Things like that. So we could start looking across things. Could you, it's called multivariate statistics. If you put in more than one variable in there, does that change the picture? And then we looked at the 4 parks. So this is, oh gosh, that whole table of his doesn't show up. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, what we had underneath here was all the scorings for these teeth. So we would do lower left, lower right, upper left, upper right, and number every single tooth so that we would score them independently. Jeffrey did his, John did his, I did mine, and we did not dialogue with each other while we went through every single animal, each of us. So there was each tooth was assessed 3 times by 3 independent people. And then that gave us a very, very robust statistical analysis. We ran some double-blind tests and to find out whether we were actually scoring in a similar way. Were we making mistakes between the 3 of us? And what we found was 93? It was really high. Yeah, 93% in agreement. And the thing that we were probably just a little bit erring on this was the height of the coronal wear, because that's a very arbitrary thing. You know, is it 5% or is it 7% sort of thing? So that underneath there was a lovely big table, so we can just skip past that. Oh, no, hey, wow, that's a bit clever, isn't it? So that was the pathology on the left, all that stuff that we were looking at, and then each tooth, was it negligible, minor, moderate, major, extreme, and was there a yes or a no, and then so each tooth fell into a number of different categories. So you might have one tooth that was scored on 5 different things. And all of this is in the paper, and it's all in the raw data as well. You can have a look at some of that stuff too. So what we found was really, really scary. Every single animal of those 29 orca had tooth pathologies.
One thing to point out is the mandible is the lower jaw and the maxilla is the upper jaw. So when you see a lot of mandibular maxillary teeth phrases, just keep that in mind. What we noticed was that probably from them, using their lower mandibular teeth for feelers or nibbling on stuff, those were the most highly damaged teeth. And this photo from Ingrid clearly shows, 4 severely damaged teeth with 3 pulpotomy holes in them.
Yeah, and it's worth keeping in mind that the upper lip of orca, it's not like ours, it doesn't flap in the wind if you get out there and they're very, very fibrous, and if you're doing a necropsy and you're trying to remove the lips so that you can get at the skull to prepare it for cleaning, you can go through 2 or 3 knives just cutting off the lips. It's like cutting through fiberglass. So that is protecting those upper teeth, even though they're against the concrete as well.
One thing I want to add while we're talking about this, everyone knows the tragedy of Can-Do 5, right? When she ran into Corky in 1989, Gabriella flashes of that in Blackfish. I don't know for sure because I never saw Can-Do 5's teeth, but when you pull, the teeth, when it goes, including the root of the tooth, goes deeply into the jaw. And one of the theories is that when Can-Do rammed Corky, that compromised architecture of her jaw is what led to it fracturing, and that's why she bled out in front of a live audience. So what happened was, I think it sliced her maxillary artery or something near her brain, and she was blowing blood out of her blowhole and just bled out.
What we found was that pathology worsened with the duration of captivity. And let's just put that in English. The longer you're in a tank, the worse it gets. And this is Morgan. and this is a series of photographs that I've taken. So this is the year, the month, and the day. So everything's in reverse, but then it files chronologically. And then we numbered the teeth, and you can see as you go, if you pick R5, I think it is, and you follow R5 down, you can just see how it gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah, Jesus is right. I mean, look at the time span on that.
6 years.
Yeah.
Why don't they cap it?
Beg your pardon?
Why don't they just cap them?
Why don't they cap them? Let's do that in questions if we've got time. Yeah, this is you again.
Yeah, so the duration of captivity, how long they live in captivity, their dental wear and damage increases.
Yeah, and so we could actually statistically predict if they are a certain age that this is the amount of tooth pathology that they would have. And that was Morgan again.
So I think this is a multi-level slide, and I think we're just going to go down, and you can see there the terms here, mandibular, and I don't know, so the red one looks at maxillary and mandibular teeth, and the yellow ones are looking at mandibular only. So mandibular is the lower jaw, and so the percentages are going to be higher in the yellow as we roll through this.
So you guys get that right? The red is both top and bottom combined. So in this case, 63% of them had varying degrees of the top of their teeth worn. But if you're only looking at the bottom jaw, it was 67%. So there's not that much difference in terms of the wear in this case. But on we go. So worn at or below the gum line, about a 10 or 11% difference. Fractures, not that much difference, but 16% of the teeth. So remember, this is every single animal's tooth and every single tooth that we had a photo of. Bore holes is pretty high, much lower in the bottom. And I asked Jeff and John about this. I said, why is that? And they said, well, it's actually really hard to drill to get the whale to lie upside down and drill their teeth, whereas you can get them to position at the stage and drill their teeth easier from when they're in the lower jaw. Same, whether you're top or bottom, you've got the same number of missing teeth. And then here we go with the results. So let's see, there we go. 24% of the whales had major to extreme wear. And the anterior, that's the back teeth, in the lower jaw exhibited the highest type of wear. And then the posterior, that's the back ones, the anterior, the front teeth, hello, and the posterior and the back teeth. So they were opposite each other. Remember that slide that Jeff had done for the Twitter thing, and you could see that difference? All right, this is you.
This is just basically a visual depiction of the stats we've pretty much talked about already. I think we should just
So we'll just scroll through it fairly fast, but it was interesting to see when you read the paper itself, if you can get through the science side of it, it was logical, but this was the first time that we actually had the science to back that logic.
Same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep going through this. But you can see that there's these peaks in the graph. So what we found in a scientific paper, once you explained your methodologies and you've shown your results, you then get the chance to put that into the big picture. And you can have this discussion. And in that discussion, you can say, well, this is what we think, and this is why we think that, and this is how we interpret the results. So we were interpreting this as it's chewing on concrete and the tanks and the metal gates. That the bore holes and the fractures were likely to be underreported, and that's probably because as the tooth wears away and gets down further and further and further, then you might not see the holes and the fractures might be masked or completely removed because the tooth is worn down. So they were likely to be underreported in our study.
I just wanted to add that as the tooth becomes fractured and then as they drill the core out of it, the structural integrity of the tooth then is diminished, and then so it's more likely to eventually go all the way down to the jawline. And I think it was Margot that answered the question. I think the reason why they don't do a full root canal is because they don't want to seal in an infectious particle or pathogen. They want to be able to continuously upwell those roe eggs and stuff like that. And it must be based on experience, you know. Whales
Yeah,
are probably, SeaWorld kind of always says it's like pneumonia or sepsis for what their whales die. They don't usually list the primary cause of death. They just kind of say whales often die of pneumonia. I think and so...
And so one of our theories is that, well, it's not a theory, it's a well-known fact. If you have troubles with your teeth, I mean severe troubles with your teeth, you will get health issues as well. And so that's why we think these animals are also having a lot of health issues, because they've got bad teeth like this. And basically here what we were talking about was that if you are in one age class or you're in another, then you're going to have a significant difference. So the older you'll get, the worse it is. And it begins at an early age. This is Aidan, or Aidan, in Loro Parque, 5 years, 6 months, born in captivity.
Wow.
Tragic, huh? Absolutely tragic. And if, I don't know if you can see it from the back of the room, but this tooth, you can actually see the red. That's the raw pulp exposed. Yeah, just make sure you do the starfish with your bum, right? You just, ooh, God, that must
I never thought I'd hear you say that.
in public, on film. Yeah. So, stop giggling. You were all doing it. We found that there was a difference between captive-born and wild-born, which was interesting. But statistically, it was significant, but it wasn't statistically significant. And then we had, wow, this is interesting. There we go. This was a template that was given to me, and so things sort of add in as you add them in. So from our experience, these guys with their in-fields in the aquarium and mine in-field in the wild, and this study itself, plus other papers that have been published about cetaceans' teeth, what we believe is that, wow, here we go again. Gosh, that's pretty interesting. Dental pathologies are largely a function of captivity-related stressors. And so what do we mean by that? Well, boredom, which results in things like the chewing. Aggression. This is Morgan being attacked by Skylar at the feeding positions. And here that probably wouldn't damage Skylar's teeth, because she's against the soft flesh of Morgan, but it's just to illustrate that this aggression is rampant, and not just amongst the males. So, painful teeth. This is Morgan. You can't see it very well, but up here there's also a big red spot. And this is because she's been banging her head against the concrete. And you can see that her teeth are just starting to wear. And Jeffrey taught me a new term when I showed him this photograph. He told me it was hypertrophic tissue damage. And it basically just comes from this repetitive banging. So that's not bruising, that's damaged underlying tissue. And there are studies showing that chewing, for all of us, and particularly animals, they've done some interesting studies, releases endorphins, and so the cortisol, the stress levels, could be dropped. And so chewing is actually, it's a way for them to reduce the pain, perhaps. So,
Yeah, we already talked about this. Basically, it can be related to gastrointestinal issues and stereotypies. So think of a horse in a barn that cribs. Everyone knows what horse cribbing is. This is basically what these animals are doing to burn time.
yeah, so this is Orchid at 28 years old, so duration in captivity along the bottom there, and you can see her teeth are pretty much, there's nothing left. So one of the things that we also speculated in the paper is that we know from other research that there is a very clear relationship between animals that have a large natural home range and stress. manifested in stereotypies, these abnormal repetitive behaviours, like you see polar bears doing all the time with that pacing, right? It's a very clear one, and it may not be so obvious to most people because to see it in whales and dolphins, because we expect whales and dolphins to be swimming, but if you watch them in a tank, they'll typically surface in the same spot each time, which is the same as pacing. And of course, oh God, we're going to go through it again. This is interesting. Orca have the whole thing about their home ranges. In many respects, some populations have larger home ranges than the biggest ranging animals like polar bears, for which are kept in captivity and stereotypies are known. So
these animals learn by modeling each other. Babies will start picking up what their siblings or their mother might do, and that's another explanation. One whale might watch another gnawing on the concrete and then try it themselves, and maybe it gives them a burst of endorphins, or who knows how it happens, but just by observing each other, that's one way we think that this behavior is transmitted.
And you guys might remember from Blackfish, they talk about the whales stripping the paint, and that was a learned behaviour as well. One of them started it, and then even to this day, if you get to look, if you go on a behind the scenes tour and you look through the windows, you'll see all around the bottom of the tank, the orca is still stripping the paint off. So yeah, young observing older animals. All right, well, and our conclusion was that stereotypical behaviour is an indicator of poor welfare, and we use that in terms of all the literature, and there's literally hundreds of papers about this, isn't there, Laurie? I mean, of all different species, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so Loro Parque, SeaWorld, it doesn't matter what facility, telling you that these abnormal repetitive behaviours have nothing to do with welfare. The literature is proving them wrong, and we have shown that these stereotypies in terms of the teeth are linked to the issues that we're seeing, and so it's kind of the circular argument that we were using, but it's quite an effective one to be able to argue, particularly if we're in court or something like that. Now this one here was an interesting one for me because just recently I was an expert witness for PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, in Tenerife in Spain against a court case with Loro Parque. And part of that was about the issue of the teeth. And we had our lawyer ask their expert witnesses, why do your orca have damaged teeth? And they said, oh, they don't really. They don't really. But all orca do, everywhere around the world, they've all got tooth damage. It's normal in the wild, so it's normal here. And then our lawyer said to them, well, you know, does it come from chewing on the concrete? What does it come from? Oh, no, our animals don't chew on the concrete. Remember, we've seen photos that were taken at Loro Parque. And then we sort of pushed them a little bit more, and then they said, but well, it actually comes from the toys. Now think about that. Who in their right mind would give their dog a toy if it damaged their teeth to the extent that you've just seen? And if you did it once and you went, oh, that's not good, would you then give it to the animal again or to another animal? I mean, this just was one of the most bizarre things I heard. And I thought the translator had translated it wrong, who was sitting next to me. And I'm like, really? That's what she said, toys? It's because of the toys? And the translator said, yes. And then we got the transcript because they videotaped court proceedings in Spain, and we had it transcribed and then translated, and sure enough, they really did say it's because of the toys. So what the hell are they thinking? And then just to sum this up, this is an example of one orca kohana at Loro Parque. Jeff and John and Carolina and Jordan Waltz, who was with us on the paper, we were a little concerned that SeaWorld might make some sort of a hoo-ha about this in terms of coming after us. We knew that we were solid on the evidence. I mean, anybody could see there's tooth damage. We knew that we were solid on the analysis and the statistics. So we were safe in all of that. but we were still concerned that they might come after us. But
it was crickets. It was really amazing because that wasn't their MO. When John and I wrote the survival paper, which was a lot more of a nebulous, debatable topic, all they did was come back. They sent a mole, first of all, to Superpod 3 to videotape John's presentation of our survival paper. Then they had a counter paper and where they used cherry-picked data to basically make the claim that, like Naomi said, their whales are living as long as the southern residents, which wasn't true, but they're comparing them to a critically endangered population. But anyway, there was just crickets, and to this day they haven't said anything and that's one reason why we tried to leverage this issue from the very beginning, was because it's irrefutable. I mean, you can look at it, you can observe the behavior, you can watch the teeth flushes, but SeaWorld has such a good control over the entire industry, actually. When Dawn was killed, they basically put the lockdown on anybody that worked in the zoological industry, and that's one thing about Carol, John, and Samantha and myself, is that we had all moved on to different fields altogether, so we weren't worried about repercussions professionally. Although I mentioned to Katie the other day, I was worried about being labeled a whistleblower as I'm looking for a new job. That wasn't, no one wants that. But anyway, it's really been amazing that they haven't said anything.
And Laura Parker, I don't know if any of you read their blogs, but if you need a good laugh, some of them are just hysterical. And they said something along the lines, I wish I'd put a quote in now, but it was to paraphrase, well, of course there's damage. Why did they bother to do the study? We know there's damage. And then we're just sitting there, well, then why didn't you do the study? Wondering. So obviously they don't want people to know about it, and we think that part of this quiet is exactly that. They don't want this message amplified by them, because the moment that they make a comment, social media will go epic, and mainstream media will go epic on it. So prod them. Prod them. Yeah? Tweet storming, whatever. Ask SeaWorld's still running to some degree. Emails, Facebook, whatever. Let's get this message out there. The paper is readily available on the internet if you do want to read it, and if you can't find it, contact Jeff and I and we'll get it to you. So thank you very much.